Hi, I'm Kim Billington, and today is Module 3 of the three-part series, Online Play Therapy Adventures. And today we're really looking at superpowers, skills, and stepping forward, moving to the end of therapy. I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work and play on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So we're going to be looking at some grounding mindfulness practices, strength-based work, looking at exploring when a client gets some influence over the problem and gathering what the client has learnt in therapy and planning for closure. So welcome back. He's got his tail wagging now. Take a breath. Take another. And prepare yourself for this online webinar. One of the things we can do with children and young people that are experiencing grief and loss is to use some of the models of the stages of grief and helping children to express these very normal feelings that are uncomfortable but associated with going through a grieving process. They might like to identify some of these and they can create their own image of how that manifests in their life. This one's like a ball of wool, but it could be in something else. They could draw a landscape with a storm. They could draw a journey that goes down into a deep valley. And again, one of the things I like to do is to open a PowerPoint, have a blank page, and insert pictures from the internet onto those that the child has chosen to represent the shock, the pain, the depression, and so on, so that they can create an online digital image of what they're going through. They can draw it on a piece of paper or on the whiteboard, a Zoom whiteboard, identifying the key things that they're experiencing. They might not be experiencing all of these, but if they can identify a couple, that allows us to look at how that feels. Carl Jung said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. So this is helpful when talking to parents about the efficacy of child counselling. It's a healthy outlet, especially when we're doing art and writing and creative expression, because words sometimes fail us. And when they do, we can use images and non-verbal expression. Now, before COVID, when everything was in person, most of you would have probably done projects like this with clients. This was a child experiencing a grief and loss with the death of a mother who had cancer. And the child was able to show that they would go and visit mum in the hospital and back again. There's little bits of Velcro, and the Velcro is attached to the back of the little people. And then mum ended up in the clouds. And then actually only a couple of months later, the grandfather also died after a long-term illness. And he went to the church behind the school for his ceremony as well. So, you know, things can be added to a big project like this that you're doing. Now, how do we translate this into online? It can be a challenge, but it's not impossible, because if you've got an idea of how something might begin and you want the child's contribution, you can either send the materials to them or invite them to assist you to do it, and then you can send the finished item to the child. The other sibling in this example was a bit resistant to talk about mum. But what happened when they saw that the younger sibling had this, then they rushed off and cut out a cat, and because their cat had died, put the cat up there with mum in the clouds. I'm bringing this up because a lot of people think that children as young as 8, have depression. They seem to have all the symptoms of depression. It can be that they have burnout. Now, there's some research from over a decade ago that introduces you to this burnout. And sometimes when the symptoms of burnout are seen as those symptoms due to a lot of stress, the response that we give as counsellors is quite different than whether they had a diagnosis of depression. So introducing that today to allow you to think a bit more carefully about what your clients might be going through. There's a link there to the article. Not sure if you'll be able to hear this, but they're advertising a car, the blue car in the middle, asking you to pay attention. No, pay attention.
To test just how much attention the attention-stealing design of the new Skoda Fabia actually steals, we left one parked on this ordinary road in West London. We wanted to see if its sharp crystalline shapes, bold lines, and lower, wider profile would attract the desired level of attention. Will the 17-inch black alloy wheels stop passers-by in their tracks? Will the angular headlights attract the attention of other road users?
So it's an advert.
Will a crowd gather to check out its fresh, sporty look? Well, not quite. But did the attention-stealing design distract you from noticing that the entire street has been changing right before your very eyes?
So were you focused on the car or the background?
Have another look. Did you spot the van changing to a taxi? How about the scooter changing to a pair of bicycles? Or the lady holding a pig? Let alone the fact that the entire street is now completely different. Didn't think so.
So we've got another one here. How many times did the white team get a pass?
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13.
So 13.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
It's easy to miss something you're not looking for. So although that was an advertisement for cyclists, it's something we can talk about in counselling when children or young people are focusing on, if you like, those negative stories or the stories of the hurt and the disappointment. And we can invite them to look for a few other things. So this is something I sometimes use around, have a look at this set of stairs and slowly climb it in your mind, keep climbing it, go back to the beginning, keep climbing it, and something happens. What happens? So after about 10 seconds, our brains are looking for something different. We get a bit bored, perhaps. No one really knows why, but we can't focus for long, and our brain is looking for something else. So that begins many interesting conversations. So after 10 seconds of dwelling on potentially something that's troubling the child or young person, we can introduce this and then say, okay, allow yourself that 10 seconds and implant something else in front of you to focus on. So get a picture, get a hope or a dream, and hold on to that for 10 seconds. or look at these cute animals that I like. So let's look at him or her for 10 seconds. Notice your breath, the rise and fall of the belly, where you're holding any tension. So we've come into the body, and this is a little grounding activity that I do with young people, and ask them what they've noticed in their body. There is a Mindfulness is a Superpower 3-minute video. I'm not sure if the sound's going to work today, so I'll let you look at that on your own. But one of the things I like to do is to direct children in particular, like the primary school age, to do 3 things for a breathing exercise. So I don't necessarily like those square breathing counting techniques, unless there's a real struggle with panic attacks, and then you might choose one that would better suit your client. But for normal mindful grounding, coming into the body to do some somatic work potentially, I say we look up, smell the flower, gently blow out the candles. Now the looking up is because when you're struggling with the low mood, it's very hard to look up. So by inviting the child or young person to look up, smell the flowers, and blowing out the candles, we've got some movement in there. And looking up is when you're feeling more content in life. So at intake, you often hear a description about the child or young person, and you think, my gosh, imagine if I was that child and I heard mum, talking to a neighbour about me in those terms. So this image is from my second book, Counselling Conversations. Chris did a couple of dozen pictures for this book, and this is one of them. So the mum's typing, "My naughty daughter, chapter 1," and the child's saying, "When do I get to write my own chapter?" And that's what we do in counselling. We get to hear about the problem from the child's point of view. We can use images online, and I've got a resource called Metaphors Move Us. I've printed this one out, but it's a downloadable resource. And in it, there are 35 pictures, and at the back there is an index of each metaphor with like a question prompt. So, for example, this one I often use at the beginning when I'm introducing myself to adults as well as children and young people. What are your hopes in asking for help? And the prompt at the back of this resource is, who else is in your support team and what has helped before? So I can say, look, this lady's sitting on a bench, she's picking up to make an appointment maybe. Who's around her? So who's around you? Who are the people close to you? Or it could be you're phoning a friend or a family member. Who do you like to phone? Who gives you a good quality conversation on the phone? So the visual that the client sees takes the pressure off that face-to-face online conversation. It doesn't feel quite so imposing. So this is another one. It's great for teenagers, and what do you need at the fit stop? So I'll say, you've come along to counselling, or mum sent you, whether you like it or not, you're here. But yeah, what's going on in your life? And in the prompts at the back, we've got what is calling for your attention, and how did things get to this tricky situation? So once they tell me what are the big problems that are happening, and so how did it get there? How did it get to be that? And using this picture again, it allows us to talk about problems. How does your body tell you to change things? So again, a lot of children have symptoms of anxiety, which is often like this fear in the belly that then rises up and starts to create rapid breathing and heart rate. So I can share this. Child has a bit of a tummy ache before school, perhaps. What does that tummy ache say to you? What's that pain saying to you? And the prompt here is listening to your body now. What is it saying to you? So what's your body actually saying? So pause, take a breath. What does that tummy ache? What is it saying? What does it need? If you were to open a first aid kit, what would your tummy need? Would it need to be kind of hugged by mum or dad? What is it? And here's another one. Which rides have you been on? So a lot of children who come to us, they might not necessarily have had our good enough parenting to start us off. And so they will have witnessed and experienced some pretty tricky things. So this allows the young person or child to share as much as they want, but it's really inviting them to share a bit of both, which in narrative therapy is really important. We want to listen to the problem and the things that the person likes about life. So the prompts here are: life brings awesome and difficult experiences. What are you learning from these? Now, you don't have to follow the prompts, obviously. You'll find your own way connecting to the child. Most children do have an animal companion, either at home or at grandparents' house or neighbour's house or friend's house. And we can have a conversation about these. The most fun thing can turn into a tricky experience, a difficulty. So, you might be able to say something like, so there's a little bit of cuts and bruises on this person that's setting off on their scooter, but is the scooter broken, do you think? What do you reckon? So not that we want to be Pollyanna with our clients, but we can get them to tell us what they're seeing in this picture. What emotions arrive in your day? And the prompts here are: how did you develop your bounce back ability? I don't like resilience as a term. So this person here's bounced back after the tumble. And who else understands that you've got this ability to bounce back? Might take a few months, might take a few hours, but tell me about that. You can ask young people to be the weather reporter or the news reporter and hold up a pencil and say, well, today from Smith Street, and off they go. They can tell you either what they're seeing, the wind is blowing the trees, or there was a storm this morning when Dad went off to work. It's really lovely if you've got time and you've got the client that's able to do this, to spend 2 or 3 sessions creating a tree of life. So that's the image on the left, the beginning of the tree of life. In the trunk are the strengths. Or you might just ask, what are some of the strengths that the young person or child has? I always ask, or what strengths has mum or dad got, and so on. This is a case example of a child that was coming to me for grief counselling. An older sibling had died suddenly in a water accident. And so what I did was I said, would you be open to drawing on the whiteboard, Zoom whiteboard, a family strengths shield? And he chose different strengths for mum and dad, and he put his brother in the strengths shield as well. And he told me this story about, because I asked, well, what does it look like when dad is helpful? You put a star next to that. And he described this time when dad was in the shed and hadn't been really talking much to mum and him back at the house. That it was a complex death of the son, and the dad was particularly affected. And but this young person who was my client, this 12-year-old, he was pretty good on a property at kind of servicing his own motorbike and things. But this particular day he couldn't put the air filter back, and he was getting frustrated. And normally he would have just asked his dad or his older brother. And he decided he would go and ask dad. And he went into the shed, and kind of dad woke up from a trance almost, as the boy described it. And something, his dad got a spring in his step. So the positive came out, and he was helpful. He came and helped him fit the air filter back, and they had a really lovely engagement. So this family strength shield can really be quite helpful, because people do have problems, big problems, hurtful problems, painful problems. But when we can look at the little things, the little stories, when children overcome the oppression by problems, it gives them a lighter heart, a little bit of hope that things might get a bit easier moving forward. So this is a vision board that a father made in counselling with me. So I'd been working with his son, and this is the one that the dad made at the same time for the final session. My send-off was, okay, we'll create a vision board. So as I said before, we can Google image and cut and paste them into a PowerPoint to create a visual expression of a connection that might have been missing now after the problem. So you can create a shield of identity. You can put anything in it. It doesn't have to be just strengths or skills. It can be achievements and values. You can do this on the whiteboard, or you can do it on a piece of paper. That the young person can have paper. You can have one, and then they can tell you what they're writing in it. They can ask for tips around spelling sometimes, and I just type that onto the whiteboard. So we both end up making something, and I'll say, well, what are you going to put in the hopes for the future? I'll put that in mine, and so on. The other thing we can do on the whiteboard is use the whiteboard to capture the circles of influence. So in narrative therapy, we're very interested in the problem. We're interested in times when the person has influence over the problem. So for this particular 17-year-old, the stepmother's power to say no to giving him a lift, and he didn't have much influence over that. He tried everything, tried being nice, tried doing chores, but no, that lift wasn't going to happen. He didn't have any influence on how his dad and his stepmom's marriage was progressing, which was downhill fast. And he had no influence over the stepmother's demands around how he keep his room in a certain way. And it really helped him to see that he wasn't a bad person. It was that he was up against someone who had their own way of running a house. They had the power to influence others, and that really until he was ready not to be visiting that home, then could he handle it? Maybe he would make those visits less frequent if he wanted to spend time with his dad. But what did he have influence over? Going to the gym. And because of this one about the stepmom not giving him a lift, he made sure he had a bike at dad's house. So he bought a secondhand bike on Gumtree so he could leave one bike at dad's house and go to the gym. And he unexpectedly told me that he got this connection and support from his grandma, and I hadn't been aware of that. This is our second session, and also connection with a girlfriend, and he helps his little brother. So we're looking at identity, how this client sees himself. So 12-year-old, this image was drawn by Tamar. So I gave Tamar some artwork of children, and she drew some images for my first book, A Counselor's Companion. Because some of the children I couldn't get permission anymore for putting their content in my book. So she drew the kind of things that the children were saying, de-identifying them. So things I can control, making sure I don't let a few difficult people spoil my whole day. We would permit them to spoil a bit of your day, but not the whole day. Talking to mum about my problems are the things I can control. Remembering that I've had these nice times with Nan. Nan had recently died. And the 12-year-old had said that they can control getting calmer quicker when they're mad. And what we unpacked there was if there was resentment added onto the frustration, was really hard to get calm. So we kind of unpacked that. And they've got no influence on going to school, who your teacher is, and when I think about my nan, because thoughts about nan would pop up quite a lot. So using the Zoom whiteboard, it can look a bit messy, and I'm typing away. I'm typing the questions I ask. These are my questions. Where are my questions? And I haven't got them on this one, but these are the questions that the young person was asking. Why have I had unfair things happen? How am I supposed to respond to life when it's unfair? And they were answering their own questions. Just get back up. That's the hardest thing I've ever done. These are the things you can control. Tips for other children. That's a really big part of counselling for me, is when I see a child get some insight or a young person get insight, I'll say, can you kind of formulate that into something I can write down? That would be a tip to put in the wisdom jar for other kids. And we can talk about that at the end. Yeah, no influence, going to school, which teacher, feels sad and bored when there's a big loss. And the influence, I can push myself to play football and keep on going and not give up. So there's a 17-year-old who is not the favoured child, annoyed that these other siblings are given more support for their studies. So they couldn't, no influence over their birth order and which emotions arise, when the emotions arise, but they do have influence over what course they study at uni, you know, who cops my irritation. This was a lovely conversation. We'll talk about these power dynamics in families. The choice to come to counselling and how initially there was no choice. They were pretty much forced to come, but now they choose to come, and staying connected to faith. So here's another of those short on the loop videos, gives us a chance to pause, take a breath. Allow the content that we've been looking at to come into the memory and for you to be able to access them in the future without it being one thing after another. So when you're doing interventions with children, you need these breathing spaces, just as we need them. So poetry is a beautiful thing. You can come across so many little inspirational quotes and poems. For a long time, when I was working in men's behavior change programs, I used to say to the men, you know, when you come back in from your break, as you sit down, please get out your phones. And they're going, what? And I said, because I want you to Google image, quote, and then put the word of the problem you're experiencing at the moment. Is it sadness? Is it anger? Whatever it is, separation, divorce, whatever it is, and find a quote with an image that you can then share with your partner. So here's one that can be helpful, especially for teenagers. Letting go of what we can't control is accepting that while we can drive our own boat, the ocean may have other plans. While we can fly our own kite, the wind will still decide how high it can soar. It's about finding peace in the fact that our book of life will be an incredible masterpiece. But not all of its chapters will be written by us. So this is quite an existential perspective, and I feel that in the 21st century, more and more children and young people are willing to take a different perspective like this. So the sailboat of life, you can get a bit of an introduction to how to do this on my website in the resources page. So this was done on the Zoom whiteboard. So what happens is a bit like the tree of life, we use the parts of the sailboat to represent parts of the person. And I actually just spoke this morning with a person that had attended my sailboat of life training. So it's a 90-minute training. And she was Zooming about something completely different, but she said, "Oh, I want to let you know that I used the Zoom whiteboard and did a sailboat with a young boy today, and I hadn't even realized what they were worried about. As soon as they drew the shark, they told me what their fears were. And if I don't think I would have known if I hadn't used the sailboat." So that can be very exciting to have that resource available to you. So, you know, thinking about things for your toolbox, the sailboat of life is particularly helpful. In the hull are the people that actually have your back. It's not mum, dad, grandma, you know, younger brother, older brother, or whatever. It's actually people that really know you, respect you, have time for you. Could be a friend, a particular friend, could be a teacher. In the sails of the strengths and skills. In the banner at the top can be something in particular that you value about life. And as I said, the shark is there. What are your top 3 fears? So again, I impress this on the counsellors that I train through Monash to introduce children very early into the best kept secret about life, is that life has got happy things and scary, unpleasant things. This is how life is. It just is like this. And the yin yang symbol can be quite helpful. So this was a 12-year-old girl came with the yin yang symbol on a necklace. And when we were talking about it, she wrote this in person, but you could equally do this online. She just basically wrote on the in-person whiteboard a poem. Sometimes you're angry, but there's always some happiness. Sometimes you're happy, but there's always some sadness. Sometimes you're scared, but there's always some courage. Even in the dark night, there's always some bright light. So Zoe gave permission, and her mum gave permission for this poem and this drawing to be in my book. And Zoe would love for you to share it with any of your clients. So in person, I have a set of scales. All right, go around the room, find a few things that make you feel good and represent nice things in your life, and then okay, now go off and put on the other side all the things that represent the challenges you've got. So this particular client, she had fun things and not so fun things. I don't use the word bad things, or I don't say good and bad. I try and avoid the word bad because children hear that word often, and I don't want them identifying either their life or themselves with that word. It's totalizing and hard to separate from. So they'd written what was fun: friends, camping, holidays, drawing, favorite color is mauve. So this particular Zoom session was, she did this from the back of a car. Her parents were out in the rain setting up camp. She was on her iPad at the back of the car, and I was typing for her these words. So the not so fun things: she was scared and worried the rain won't stop, and worried the dingoes might bite us all over because they were on Fraser Island. So she's getting a sense of there are some fun things in life, even though something really awful had happened to her. So here's a slightly older child. The problems were issues with friends, bullying, school exam worries, excluded from friends, snide remarks and online. And the good stuff was pets, creative dance and music. So you can draw a pizza, the reasons mum and dad have separated, and I can share this. This is something that was an online, an in-person activity. There were 2 jars, and one had all the pop sticks with things written on them that were pretty cool about mum and dad getting separated, and then the other had the pop sticks where, you know, that's not so easy now, they're separated. But children often come to counselling thinking they're the problem, that they caused this in some way, this family breakup. So the pizza of adult reasons, arguments, Ellie, Will, and me not doing stuff. When we used to go to a restaurant, they didn't get food. So, there's a little story there about an argument, and someone had gone to the restaurant they didn't want to go to, and their husband had said, "Oh, well, you don't have to eat." And the tension, you can imagine the tension. Dad and the children are kind of eating, but guess what? They weren't really digesting it, and Mum's sitting there not eating. So, children experience things when parents are having arguments and not getting along. But we can externalize it, draw it on a pizza, help them see these things rather than it be just swirling in their mind all the time, and it's all confusing and there's chaos. So this on the left was a collage made in person, but again, it can equally be drawn on the whiteboard. It's about a little boy who's 11, who had a suitcase full of frustration, sadness, resentment, powerless, and worried. And he's going along, and he kept turning left and heading towards danger with his anger. And he found this. We Google imaged a lot of things to cut out, to color print and cut out for his collage, and he found one that said anger is only one letter short of danger. And so he creates this image. He's kind of talking to himself that there's danger ahead if he goes this way. Caution, slow down. And the road to success is this way. And it's a smoother road. But he really wants his parents to celebrate the success. That same kind of fork in the road or the crossroads is helpful with young people cutting, because when young people say, oh, they're cutting, maybe they cut 3 times a week, we might imagine that they only go to the bathroom to cut 3 times a week. And this particular young person said, oh no, I put my hand on the handle of the bathroom like 3 times a day. And I say, well, so you go in 3 times a day? Oh no, sometimes I just put my hand on the handle of the bathroom and then I just go to my room. I don't go in. Oh, whoa, well, hang on a minute. What's happening? So you're at the stop sign. Your bedroom's there and the bathroom's there. So how many times do you actually turn the handle and go in and cut? Oh, I don't know, 20% of the time. Oh, okay. Well, I've got to get my head around that. So when you choose not to do that and you go to your room, what are you saying to yourself? What does that mean? And she said, I'm being kind to myself. So again, she gave me permission to share this with other people. In narrative therapy, we very much invite children with lived experience to share something for others. And so I've got a collection of things that I can share. And it helps these young people and children feel that they are helping other people. It gives them a certain purpose. What they've achieved might be meaningful or of value to someone else. Oh, that was the break. If you wanted to stop there. Michael White said, no one is a passive recipient of hardship. So when something happens, people don't just do nothing, whether they're children or adults. So maybe if someone starts to send you unpleasant texts, you might eventually read all these texts, but initially you might turn your phone off. So I would say, why did you turn the phone off? Oh, I couldn't bear reading it. So why was that important to you? Because it's just not fair, and it doesn't really represent me. Okay. So part of you knows that what's going on there isn't fair, it doesn't represent you. And you knew. You weren't just a passive recipient of all this stuff coming to you from this person. You knew it wasn't right. So that's the kind of way I talk about these things. So this person was minimizing the effects of that, trying to make it stop. She went and spoke to one of her teachers and so on. Now, often counsellors don't take notice of these small steps that the person did to try and reduce the effect of the problem. But in narrative therapy, we're really on the lookout for that. So younger children, they can draw their superpowers. There's a little a link there to a worksheet. I don't I don't use worksheets, but I know lots of people that love them, so I put that there. And if you had some superpower tools, what would they be made of? What would they look like? What would they actually do? There's a great website called Emerging Minds that has some awesome material that is very appropriate to play in an online session. So just short videos, 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can talk about them afterwards. So on my website, there's a downloadable resource, and it's just this. It's this coloured picture of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell is the person who introduced the world to this idea that every story that ever was a monomyth, which means it's just the mythic structure, one mythic structure, and all the myths follow it. And that is, there's a person going along, minding their own business, and they move from the known to the unknown. And it's a bit of a shock sometimes, but it's too late. You can't go back. And the problem affects you. So it might be somebody affects you, or something happens, like there's a loss in the family, or you've had to change schools. So you're facing some tests. You might be feeling guilty or afraid or shameful, but there's always a helper. You think about Harry Potter. Think about any story from your childhood. There's always helpers. Now, we enter often into the client's life here where they've already had the problem in their life for a period of time. And what's happened is their ways to try and resolve the problem haven't helped, and that becomes a problem. So the fact they personally or their family can't help them get over the problem, that becomes a separate problem. Like depression. Depression isn't the first thing that happens. Someone's not walking along and suddenly they're depressed. Either it's bullying or something else happens. So in the cave, Joseph Campbell, describes it sometimes as a cave. There's a dragon, but it's not an external dragon. It's your own shadow, if you like. So it's the kind of stuff that let's deal with it now. And then as you grow older, you'll know how to deal with it because it's your own unresolved stuff. Maybe you like to please people and you don't want to say no and things like that. And that's making the problem worse. So we meet the client in this cave and we hear the story and we have the conversations and they do the work. And over time, as you know, miraculously, things start to change. Not all perfectly by any means, but there is change. And this change is like this alchemy of transformation. And again, in narrative therapy, we're really unpacking what did you do to create that change? How did you know how to do it? How did you keep going when it seemed it wouldn't work? So we're really wanting to find out, not, oh, great, problem's done. We want to find out how they did it. What are their strengths? What interesting approaches did they use? And then again, we help them along onto the road back. And they've often got new values and new skills of living. And then Joseph Campbell talks about the return. He said, the hero sets off on this journey, but they never come back the same. They come back with renewed identity, sensations and images and personal descriptions of self-worth. And they come back into their community more impactful for a wider circle. Timelines are great and they're so easy to do on the Zoom whiteboard. This is a 7-year-old that had arrived in Australia just before COVID and hadn't had time to learn English, so found it really hard, as you can imagine, on a group Zoom call with a teacher and all these children, and he was really struggling. But we identified some happy places, and there was a happy time with lots of friends back in his original country. Here's a 12-year-old I can say what was happening here. They draw the timeline of the ups and downs, the pluses and minuses, and I can say, well, what was happening here? What was happening here? And where are you now? Tell me a story about that. So I do a lot of Google images and cutting and pasting them onto a PowerPoint so we can talk about that. So if a child uses the word like, like I could just see in my mind this red sign saying danger, this new kid at school was starting to bully kids, and my client was someone who often was the target of bullies. So he said, yeah. And we found that image and put it onto a PowerPoint and talked about it in terms of, 3 years ago, you might not have known what that new arrival at the school was capable of, but now. And so that shows that there's some new assessment about people that you can be genuinely wary of. And this is a really important thing in life. We can also create things like a remote control with some kind of, responses that they can have, like I can go to my happy place, I can walk my dog. We can create a tricky moments plan. So if you're one of these people that likes to do like safety planning of any kind, you can talk about those. Here's a boy who, I think he was about 11 and a half, had his anger had escalated quite a lot throughout COVID because the whole family was working from home. Him and his older brother, who was about 17, who was the golden child, both parents would openly say, oh, he does this, he does that, he's just wonderful. This poor 11-year-old, all he seemed to be good at was having temper tantrums, Anyway, I worked with the parents quite a bit even before I met him, and then also on Zoom calls after I met him. And so this was probably after about 10 sessions. And we were getting to the close of our work, but he mentioned something about boiling rage. I thought, oh, wow, boiling rage. I've never heard someone kind of use that at that age. So we drew these steps on the whiteboard, and I typed away. I'm the scribe, So I typed his words. Why isn't this working? Because he's developed some, strategies through doing the counselling work. And why aren't they working? Kim must be hopeless, This is not how I wanted it to be. Why am I treated like this? So even though I'd worked strongly with the parents, their default was pretty much to blame him and point the finger, And then he said he became defensive and troubled and sad, but he developed this real articulation of what was going on for him. And then he said, that's when I hit boiling rage, and I'm hitting it more now than when I met you. It was like, just what the counsellor wants to hear, And then I said, oh, well, that sounds like that's about the worst it can get. And he said, no, there's one more. And I thought, what's worse than boiling rage? And he says it's insanity. Well, as I said, children of this century will surprise you. So I said, okay, look, I've known you long enough now. You probably know yourself a bit better. Let's write down the warning signs. So he could just list them off like that. His arms went stiff, body tenses up. He would mutter to himself. This is what the parents hated in particular, because they could never hear quite what he was muttering under his breath. Then he would cry. They hated that as well. And then he would lean back in his chair and tilt his head back. So he was doing some kind of regulation. Remember how I said earlier, one of the breathing things is you look up. That lifts the mood. And so I said, well, what do you need when these things are happening? Again, he straight away came up with, I need someone to notice that I need help. So this is quite different from when I first was working with him. So what would that look like? Well, they need to make eye contact, maybe put the hand on my shoulder. And even if they're on a Zoom call or on a phone call with work, they can say, I will help soon. And, not that I like the word triggers, but it was very handy. and it is handy sometimes. So give me 3 triggers. Okay, Dad has meetings that last too long and he felt sad. And when I get some schoolwork wrong, again, because of this golden child that does no wrong and was really high in academic success, this particular boy felt very, very sick inside when he got mistakes at school. He was very bright, as you can tell. Or the computer has a glitch. So that would really escalate things. And then I said, look, what if we print this out and give it, and, and mum and dad can have it, I can email it to them, this Zoom whiteboard, and then let me write at the top things you can do while you're waiting for mum and dad to come and sort things out. So he put number 1, learn to wait for help. Number 2, just walk away and do something to calm down. Number 3, be quiet and take 3 breaths. So that actually worked really well, doing this exploratory, the stages leading up to boiling rage. There's some butterfly hugs, glimmers. I'm not going to go through them. You can have a look yourself, but they're on YouTube. A mum and her kids are doing these. And there's one of those squeezing and release activities. So they can be really helpful to sit online with a client and look at those and practice them. This is also on my website. If there's been a journey with grief, we can say, well, tell me about your story, because this is the story of someone that something happened here and they felt alone. Tell me about yours. So they can either use this as a guide or they can draw their own. But at some point, we've coming to the end of the sessions that we've been working with the family or the child, a young person. And at the end of each session, it's like a single session ending, like, well, wrapping up, we're nearly done. What stood out as useful today? What might be helpful next? And I see other children with tricky problems. Have you got any good tips? So I do that more in the session itself, but I can also do it at the end. And who else can you go to this week who will have good listening ears? So it can be, well, this is our last session. Who else could you go to if you felt troubled? And I get them to draw on a piece of paper, and I can draw it on the whiteboard. And we can find 4 people they could go to. And in the 5th, I say, let's save that one for the Kids Helpline number. Now, the Kids Helpline number is 1-800 55 1800. So it's pretty easy to remember. 1-800 1800. Sometimes young people, not many, but young people have been known to keep a journal and share with me the kind of things they've written down when the session's finished, and they can share them and I can type them on the Zoom whiteboard, or I can make them a co-host. They can share what they've written. Goodbye rituals. Maybe you've got a joke that you tell at the end of each one. Maybe they bring their cat and say goodbye. Maybe they get an animal and put it on their head, or whatever it is. And now, what are you doing afterwards? Because we're in 2 minutes, we'll close the screen. I'll say goodbye, we'll close the screen. What are you going to do next? And they tell you, oh, well, we're going shopping for a new pair of school shoes this afternoon, whatever it is. And have you got any ideas what we could do next week? Oh, well, yes, I want to do more of this, or this, So when the child is having their last session, you can say, I'm going to post you something. You can go to the $2 shop or the discount shop and get a little box and put in it a couple of things that are symbolic. And you can say to them, okay, here's the box, and you can decorate it with some textures. It's plain, but in it, I'm putting a rubber, an eraser. And that means that if you make mistakes, it's okay. You can always rub things out. Yeah. I'm going to put a dice in there as well, because guess what? You don't always roll a 6 first time. You have to keep trying sometimes. So that's the kind of thing you can do. A balloon, reminds you to breathe and smile, and so on. So here's a link to someone that has some interesting kind of closing activities. You can, if your agency or you require some kind of how the therapy's been progressing, you can do this at the end of each session. This is a drawing that Tamar created based on a child's drawing, an 8-year-old, and she just surprised me. She just said, it was the last session, she said, "Oh, I'm going to draw something for you, Kim, on the whiteboard." So she went and got all the colors and she drew like a seesaw, and she said, "When I first came to counseling, you know, the bad things were weighing me down, and then in counseling things were getting better, and now look, the good things are filling up the bowl." Then we can talk about, well, what have been the achievements? Have you achieved any goals coming to counselling? What's made a difference? So again, these visual things that are available to insert into PowerPoints are really lovely to prompt a conversation about achievements or goals. So in person, you might have a jar and children can write things in and put them in the jar, but online, you can have a collection. You can have one PowerPoint where that has all the tips and the children can choose what picture they'd like to go with it. So if they're cat people, they could choose a kitten or a cat, and the PowerPoint that wouldn't have their name on it would have the picture of the cat, and then it would have their tips for what worked for them. And there's a lovely thing on Instagram. It's when turtles help one another. So it's a little, you can just Google this, it's probably on YouTube as well. There's a turtle that's upside down in the water and he's really struggling. And slowly all these other turtles come and they all tip him the right way. So that's what the children's, you know, tips for others can do. We help one another in life. So for the family, I encourage them and coach them around how to use family meetings and to have an exercise book. I call it the solution book. So basically, you know, I'll say it's a magic book. Everyone writes in that book the problems, but when you open it as a family every week, solutions appear. And then I'll say things like, yeah, but the thing is, this magic wand, I've lost the USB, so it doesn't always work, you know. But anyway, to gather once a week for a family meeting to talk about something that's come up. You can also use it to plan for holidays or showcase one child at a time or a parent. And those of you that like you know, cards, you might think, oh, I've got all these cards I've bought, but I can't use them anymore with online work. Well, you can, you just photograph them. And this is, you know, from a last session, the person was going to connect more with their cat to calm them down, looking at a certain TAFE course they wanted to do, and they really wanted to do some travel in a few years. So we're coming to the end. Time for another breath. Grounding. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Leaning back a little bit. Looking up, imagine the raindrops washing things clean. And there's the resources if you're interested. So thank you very much for joining me today.